The sun was rising over the dry land, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and gold. The morning air was quiet, and the wind moved slowly over the dusty road that led to the old wooden ranch. Samuel stood at the porch looking out at the land that had once been full of promise. He was a tall man with tired eyes and hands rough from years of work. Life had not been kind to him lately, and it showed in the way he carried himself, strong on the outside, but tired deep inside. He had 3 small children inside the house, 2 boys and a little girl. They were still asleep on this early morning, but Samuel was already awake as he had been every day since the day his life changed. He could still remember the cold night when his wife had gotten sick and passed away. It had been a quiet evening at first, but by the time morning came, everything he knew had changed forever. Since that night, Samuel had done everything he could to take care of the children, the ranch, and the animals. But nothing seemed enough. His youngest, only 4 years old, cried often, asking for a mother she no longer had. His oldest boy had stopped laughing the way he used to. The house felt heavier now, not because of the work but because of the silence. The ranch was not just a home. It was Samuel's whole world. He had built it with his wife when they were young, believing they would grow old together there. But dreams had a way of fading fast on the frontier. The land was hard and the days were long. The sun could burn the earth dry in summer and the winter winds could cut through the thickest coat. Every day was a test of strength. Samuel tried to do everything alone. He cooked simple meals for the children, fed the animals, fixed the fence, and worked the fields. But some days, when he looked at the endless land around him, he felt small and powerless. The ranch needed more hands, the children needed more care, and he was just one man. The people in town had noticed how much he had changed. Samuel used to smile when he came to the small general store, tipping his hat to the shopkeeper and greeting everyone with warmth. Now he walked in quietly, bought what he needed, and left without much to say. It wasn't that he had stopped caring. It was that his heart carried too much weight. One evening, as he sat alone on the porch with a cup of weak coffee, an older man from town came to visit. He was a trader, a man who had seen many lives rise and fall on this land. He had known Samuel for years. He spoke slowly with a voice that carried both age and experience. "Samuel," he said, "a man can't run a place like this alone. You've got the children to care for. You need help." Samuel looked at the land and sighed. "Help costs money I don't have," he replied. The trader leaned forward, lowering his voice. "There are women, young women. They were taken from tribes out west. Some men are taking them in. $6. That's all it takes. They do the work, help with the house, take care of the young ones." Samuel froze. He had heard whispers like this in town before but had pushed them away. The idea didn't sit right with him. But he also thought about his little girl crying at night, calling for someone who wasn't there. He thought about the empty kitchen and the unwashed clothes piling up. $6, the man repeated. "It's not much. And your children need someone." That night, Samuel couldn't sleep. He lay on his bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft breathing of his children in the next room. The youngest had climbed into his bed again, clinging to his arm the way she used to cling to her mother. Samuel's heart ached. He knew $6 was almost everything he had saved, but he also knew something had to change. A few days later, Samuel rode into town with his horse and wagon. The sun was already high and the heat pressed down on his shoulders. The trading post was busier than usual. He didn't look at anyone as he walked toward the back, where a few men were talking in low voices. The trader saw him and nodded slowly, as if he had known this day would come. "You're here," the trader said. Samuel nodded once. His hands felt cold even though the sun was burning. "I need help," he said simply. $6, the man said. Samuel took the small leather pouch from his pocket and placed it on the table. It was all the money he had left after months of hard work. Later that afternoon, a wagon rolled into town. Samuel stood silently as a young woman stepped down. She was dressed in worn clothing and didn't look anyone in the eye. Her hair was long and dark, and her face was calm but unreadable. She was from an Apache tribe far from the town, brought here against her will. She had seen too much for someone so young. Samuel didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. He only knew that she would be coming back with him to the ranch. She stood with quiet strength even in a strange place surrounded by strangers. The children who had come to town with Samuel stared at her with wide eyes. The ride back to the ranch was silent. Samuel held the reins tightly, the leather cutting into his hands. He could hear the wheels creaking and the distant cry of birds. The woman sat at the back of the wagon, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She didn't speak, but her silence spoke louder than words. When they arrived at the ranch, the children followed Samuel as he opened the door. The house smelled like old wood and dust. It wasn't dirty, but it didn't feel warm either. It felt like a house, not a home. The young woman stepped inside slowly, as if she was walking into a place she wasn't sure she belonged. Samuel cleared his throat. This is home," he said awkwardly. He wasn't used to explaining himself. She didn't respond but glanced around the room. There was a wooden table with 3 chairs, a stove in the corner, and a few pots hanging on the wall. A faded rug lay on the floor, worn out by years of footsteps. The children watched her closely. The little girl, curious but shy, hid behind her oldest brother. The young woman finally knelt down and gently smiled at her. It wasn't a big smile, just a small, soft one. For a moment, the little girl forgot to be afraid. Samuel felt something shift inside the house that day. Something small but real. For months, the air had felt heavy, like a storm cloud hanging low. But now it felt like a soft wind had moved through, not changing everything, but changing something. The first few days were quiet. She cooked simple meals, cleaned the kitchen, and helped the children with their clothes. She didn't speak much, but she was kind. The children began to follow her around the house, curious about her way of doing things. Samuel watched from a distance, unsure of how to act. He didn't know her language, and she didn't know his well. But some things didn't need words. When she carried water from the well, he fixed the broken fence. When she cooked, he took care of the animals. It was not partnership, not yet, but it was something like it. At night, Samuel sat on the porch and listened to the quiet sounds coming from inside the house. The children were laughing again, soft and shy at first, but laughter all the same. He hadn't heard that sound in a long time. He still felt the weight of everything that had brought them here. He knew he hadn't done something noble or fair, but he also saw the way his children looked at her, not with fear, but with growing trust. And that trust gave him a kind of hope he hadn't felt since his wife passed away. The woman, still unnamed to Samuel, brought something the house had lost. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was presence. It was care. It was life. And as the days slowly passed, Samuel began to wonder if what started as a desperate act might one day become something more, something that could change not just his ranch, but his heart. The days slowly turned into weeks and weeks into months. Life on the ranch began to change in quiet, steady ways. The mornings were no longer filled with silence. The soft sound of someone moving in the kitchen, the smell of warm bread, and the gentle laughter of the children began to fill the air. The young Apache woman moved around the house as if she had always been a part of it, though she spoke little and asked for nothing. Samuel often watched her from a distance, trying to understand her. She worked with grace, and there was something strong in the way she carried herself. She didn't try to fit into their lives quickly but slowly, like the first light of morning that gently spreads over the land. The children, who once kept to themselves, now followed her wherever she went. She taught the little girl how to braid her hair and pick wildflowers that grew near the edge of the land. She showed the boys how to make small wooden toys from broken branches. When the wind blew strong at night, she would hum a soft tune in her language, a melody that none of them understood but all of them felt. It wrapped around the house like a warm blanket, making it feel less lonely. Samuel noticed how the children changed. His oldest son, who used to sit outside in silence, now helped her with small tasks and smiled more often. The little girl would run to her every morning as soon as she woke up. The house was no longer just wood and nails. It was becoming a home again. Samuel had once believed that nothing could make the ranch feel alive again. But now, when he walked through the door after a long day of work, the house greeted him with warmth. There was the smell of food on the stove, the sound of children laughing, and the sight of the woman moving quietly, taking care of things without needing to be asked. At first, Samuel didn't talk to her much. He wasn't a man of many words, but slowly the silence between them began to change. It became a soft silence, not a heavy one. One evening, as they sat outside on the porch watching the sun go down, Samuel tried to speak to her, You've done a lot, he said slowly, unsure of what words to use. She looked at him, not speaking but listening carefully. He realized she understood more English than she let on. He cleared his throat. The children, they're happy again. Her eyes softened a little. She nodded once. That was enough. No big words were needed. After that, they began to speak in small ways. Not long conversations, but short, simple words. They found ways to understand each other through gestures, expressions, and kindness. He began to learn a few of her words, and she learned more of his. She also taught the children about the land. She showed them how to find water when the ground looked dry, how to follow the wind, and how to respect the animals that roamed near their ranch. She never spoke about her past, but everything she did showed the deep bond she had with nature. One warm afternoon, Samuel came back from the fields to find her standing near the corral, gently feeding a horse that had always been restless. The animal had never let anyone come close, but with her it was calm. Her hands were steady and her voice was soft as she whispered to the horse in her language. Samuel stopped and watched. He felt something stir inside him, something quiet, like a seed beginning to grow. He realized then that she didn't just live on the land. She understood it. She belonged to it in a way that he never had. As the seasons passed, the ranch grew stronger. The fences were fixed, the crops began to grow better, and the animals were healthier. The children were no longer weak from hunger or sadness. There was music in their laughter again, but not everything was simple. One day news came from town. A group of officials was traveling through the area, moving people from native tribes to new locations. Some said they were looking for those who had been taken or traded. Samuel felt a cold knot in his chest. He knew that if they found out about her, they might try to take her away. That night he couldn't sleep. He sat at the edge of his bed, listening to the quiet sounds of the house. The children were sleeping peacefully in the next room. She was in her small room at the back of the house. Samuel thought about the day she had arrived, silent and alone. He thought about the way she had changed everything, not just for the children, but for him too. He realized something important. She wasn't just a helper anymore. She wasn't just a woman brought here for $6. She was a part of their lives now, a part of their family. The next morning, when she stepped outside to begin her chores, Samuel met her at the porch. His hands were shaking slightly, but his voice was steady. People may come, he said. They might try to take you away. She didn't show fear. She simply looked at him with calm eyes. For the first time, she spoke a full sentence in English. This is home now. Her words were soft, but they carried strength. Samuel felt his heart tighten. He knew what he had to do. A few days later, the officials arrived. They came riding on horses, asking questions around town. When they reached Samuel's ranch, they looked around and saw her working in the garden with the children. This woman, one of them said. She's from a tribe. She should come with us. Samuel stood firm. No, he said simply. She's with us. She's family. The man frowned. She doesn't belong here. She belongs right here, Samuel said, his voice calm but clear. This is her home. The children ran to her side, holding her hands tightly. They didn't need words to make their feelings known. The officials looked at the determined faces of the children, then at Samuel, and finally at her. Something in their expression softened. After a long moment, they turned their horses and rode away. The wind carried the sound of their departure, leaving behind a silence filled not with fear but with relief. Samuel turned to her. She didn't say anything, but there were tears in her eyes, quiet tears that spoke more than words ever could. For the first time since she had arrived, she reached out and gently held his hand. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. Life continued on the ranch. The children grew taller and stronger. Samuel smiled more often. The house was no longer a lonely place. It was warm, full of life and love in its quiet, steady way. She began to teach the children more about her people's traditions, songs, dances, and stories told under the stars. And Samuel listened too, learning bit by bit about the woman who had once been a stranger and was now family. Years passed, but Samuel never forgot the day she first arrived. She had walked into his house quietly, with no promises and no demands, and yet she gave them something priceless, a second chance at life. The land outside the house still looked the same, wide, open, and endless. But something was different now. It felt alive. The wind no longer felt cold. The ranch was no longer just a place of work. It was a home. On one quiet evening, as the sun set over the horizon and painted the sky with soft golden light, Samuel sat on the porch with her by his side. The children were playing nearby, their laughter floating in the warm air. Samuel looked at her and then at the land. He remembered the day he had said, "My children need a mother." Back then, those words had come from a place of desperation. Now they held a different meaning. He didn't just want someone to care for his children. He wanted her, the woman who had walked into their lives and changed everything without ever demanding anything in return. She turned her face toward the sunset, her hair moving gently in the evening breeze. Samuel didn't speak, and neither did she. They didn't need to. The quiet between them was no longer empty. It was full of everything they had built together day by day. The children ran up to the porch, their faces glowing with joy. The little girl sat beside her, leaning against her shoulder. Samuel watched the scene with a peaceful heart. He had once thought he was alone in this world, holding everything together with tired hands. But now he knew he was not alone. She had not only changed their home, she had changed their hearts, and that was something no amount of money could ever buy.